Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the live stream. My name is Matt Bailey, the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Thank you so much for joining in for yet another live stream. I ruined my hair just before I started. How about that? Not that I really did my hair before I started, but, you know, you're going to get that cockatoo effect as soon as I've begun. Thank you so much for joining in tonight. 3 live streams this week. Monday night tonight, Tuesday night live with Luke McCarthy, and then Thursday night live with Heather Tillett. If you don't know of Luke or Heather yet, you totally should. They're 2 fantastic people. Luke is a writer, author, reviewer, runs Oz Whiskey Review, runs a few other things, used to work at Whiskey and Ailment, so he's quite an accomplished bartender, mixologist. Don't tell him I said that. And then you've also got Heather Tillett, who's the head distiller for Sullivan's Cove, joining us on Thursday night, which is going to be heaps of fun. Give us a hair flick. I've already ruined it. I already touched it just before I went live, and it's gone all crazy on me again. Good evening, Dr. Akers. Of course, good evening. I'm going to say Dr. Marshman. Bailey, you are amazing. I really appreciate that. I know it comes from the bottom of your heart, Ryan, your big, big heart. G'day all from Darren Howie, and evening from Mr. Finnegan, 45 Finn. How are you, mate? Good to see you, everyone joining in. Yes, it is bloody warm in Sydney as well today. Jesse says, Slancho or anyone else sweating in Victoria? I heard it's very hot in Melbourne today. And perfect weather for a mint julep, as he says there as well. I'm going to pop some awesome comments up on screen, so please throw your comments, throw your questions into the stream. Always love throwing them up live and taking your questions as we go. And a big wave from Krisna. Krisna was our chocolatier for Whiskey and Chocolates event just late last year. I think, dare I say, 4th of December, somewhere around there was the event. Anyway, it was fantastic. Yeah, turn that fan on in the background for that hair. Yeah, I will. If I turn that fan on, my hair's going to be completely ruined. These headphones are the only thing keeping them from going crazy at the moment. Really appreciate you tuning in. Tonight is all about the original Game Changers. It sounds a bit of a sort of like one of those quotes, like, what does it mean to be an original game changer? The Society has been, since its inception in 1982, an original game changer for whiskey. Indeed in Australia and indeed around the world. Australia since 2002, but since 1982, the Society and the Vaults and the club that it is has been changing the landscape on whiskey. And I want to talk again. I've talked a little bit about some of this before in the past, but I want to touch on some of the firsts and some of the things that have come across since that have happened in the last 38-ish years of the Society. And what's really cool is that being 38 years of the Society, kicking off from sort of it'll be 20 years of the Society from next year, which is in Australia. So that's going to be a pretty special year for us. And we've also got 40 years of the Society also next year, I think. Yeah, I think it makes sense. 2022. Yeah. Anyway, so there we have some really special sort of things in the pipeline, obviously this year and next coming in. Our resident mad scientist. Yes, our resident mad scientist, Krisna, of course. Krisna, they're referring to you, mate. You are the resident mad scientist. So I'm going to bring up the slides here so you can see what we're talking about. The first one I want to talk about is Japanese and Irish and others that we've bottled in the past. Now, when I'm going to just mention this before. Like I said, I've mentioned some of these things before, but these are examples of where the Society has been the original game changer for whiskey innovation, for breaking boundaries, for being a little bit sort of like cheeky with some of the things we've done. And it has meant in the past that we've pushed the boundaries on what is possible, what people expect of us, of what is essentially called a Scotch Malt Whisky Society. But we don't just bottle Scotch Malt Whisky, of course. We bottle, these days, American, Indian, Swedish, Danish, English, Welsh, Japanese, of course, Scotch whiskey, all sorts of things like that. But back in the early days, it wasn't always the case. And I'm going to bring up some imagery here for us to take a look at of what I mean here. Here are some of the early bottlings. Now, you can, if you drool on screen, I'll understand that completely, because even just the rarity of these things is something else. So here we have 4. We've got 116.1.2.3.4, the first 4 ever bottlings from Distillery 116, which is Japanese malt whiskey, single cask malt whiskey. Now, when these were bottled, and I'm going to preface this by saying, to the best of my knowledge, this was the first time we ever saw independent bottlings of Japanese whiskey. Think about that for a second. So Japanese whiskey sort of really found its footing around 1913, 1918. I'm probably going to get that wrong. But that's where it first found its footing with some of these distilleries, which we know and love today. However, it wasn't until 2002 when some of these were bottled. 2001, 2002. They were all bottled. These first four were bottled in 2002. So 2002 was quite a pivotal year for the society. When these were bottled, there was a letter that came in from a member in the UK saying, "Oh, this is the death of an institution. No longer, can we just have Scotch whiskey? We have to have all these weird other countries as well." And that included 117.1. When that was first bottled, Irish malt whiskey, that was considered, it was blasphemous, it was wrong, shouldn't do this. Japanese whiskey, oh, the horror, as Darren says here. Absolutely right. It was this horror of bottling Japanese whiskey. How could you possibly do this? And there's actually somewhat more horror when they bottled Irish whiskey. Of course, the Scots and the Irish always like to fight over things, including, where whiskey came from and the correct spelling of it and all that kind of stuff. So that's always fun. But it was, this was a game changer for society in terms of bottling these spirits that were not Scotch whiskies. And there was one particular member in the UK at the time, in 2002, who wrote a letter into our newsletter at the time saying, this is wrong. This shouldn't happen. This is not a thing. Please don't bottle Irish whiskey. Please don't bottle please don't bottle Japanese whiskey. This is the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. And that one of the comments he made was, what would you do if you found out that BMWs were made outside of Germany? And it's like, these days they are. It's a sort of a symptom of globalization. It's a symptom of I won't even say symptom, just a cause, if you like, a cause of. But to ignore these realms of whiskey, to ignore these other nations making great whiskey because it's called the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society seems a bit silly. So I just want to touch on that first and foremost. And I want to show you how they were first actually listed. This is really cool. I love this part, by the way. This is how the first Japanese whiskeys at the society were actually were sold to members. So here's the Society Autumn Bottlings of 2002. And this was the newsletter, as we now know it as Outturn Today. And it had Mr. Takatsuro with RB Nickel, distillery manager, 1918 to 1920. And then we have the Japanese bottlings, coconut pea pods and tropical hothouses, a 16-year-old, 116.1, and a spice box and orange oil, an 11-year-old from that same distillery. And of course, if you bought both of them together, you got a book, a free copy of Japanese Whiskey Scotch Blend by Olive Checkland. I don't know that book. Murray, I might need your help on that one. But we were always pretty good at hiding the distillery name, though. Even at the top, it says the only distiller in Japan's northern island, Hokkaido, was also the first whiskey distillery founded in Japan in 1934 by the father of Japanese whiskey and founder of Nikka Distilleries, Masataka Takatsuru. It was created very much on the Scottish model with stone buildings and pagoda roofs. It is actually quite a stunning looking distillery. But look at that, 47 pounds and 40 pounds. Now, we might look back on that and go, God, that's, if only you could still buy, single cask 16-year-old Japanese whiskey for 47 pounds. But you've got to adjust for 20 years now of inflation and also understand that they had to be attractive because they weren't popular. They weren't popular. They were incredible whiskeys by all accounts. And they were delicious, well-aged, sherried Japanese whiskey. They were fantastic. But 47 pounds that's an absurd amount of money, especially in 2002 for an unknown quantity. Now, people, I think, will look at the same thing when they see some of the English, Welsh, Indian whiskies that we've been selling. And they are sometimes a bit slower on outturn for us. I'll admit that. They are. That's fine. I mean, Scotch whiskey is still more popular in Australia, and that's fine. But you do see things on outturn every so often, and you'll look back on them going, I can't believe I didn't grab one of those at the time. I really do think that. We're going to come to that era. We're going to say how good, we had this, influx of amazing English whiskies, let's say. We had one about a year ago, which was an amazing peated English whiskey that is often overlooked because you go, well, I'm only looking for Isla peat. As soon as you venture, as I've talked about before, as soon as you venture out of Isla for your peated whiskies, you find some real gems. I mean, some fantastic gems. Great comment here from Jesse Morgan. To my knowledge, one of the biggest game changers would have been the use of bourbon barrels for Scotch. Very much true, Jesse. Allowing for globalized and mass-produced whiskey to the scale we know today. Could be completely wrong, though. What do you see could be a whiskey world-changing invention? Ooh. What do you see could be a whiskey world-changing invention? Ooh. I mean, that's a really good question, Jesse. First of all, just to the first part of your comment, yes, one of the original game changers that would have been was the use of ex-bourbon barrels. It's a law that is in the USA that they can only use those barrels once, virgin oak barrels once to create bourbon. However, that law actually predates even Prohibition era. So that is a law that I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. No one's really pushing for it to go away either. We are going to see an increase in the interest and demand in American single malt, which means they're going to be reusing some of their barrels themselves. But you've got to understand, American single malt is probably, I can probably safely say, less than 1%. Actually, I can probably even say less than 0.1% of total American spirit output. So it's a bit like saying, what's the percentage of Australian whiskey consumed in Australia versus American or Scottish whiskey? It's less than 1%. I'd say the same could be said about American single malts. They're not very popular. There's a few craft distilleries getting into it. But as soon as it won't be really popular, really, until there's enough of an uptake in American consumers wanting to drink American single malt, which I think will take a long time. I'm talking decades. And the second reason is, bourbon is king. And honestly, all the American single malts I've seen are dearer. And there's a good reason for that. Australia produces more barley than America does. So you've got a country that needs, if they want to make single malt, they need barley. Barley production is pretty much limited to 3 states in the northwest belt of America. So it's like 95% of all barley production in the United States is 3 states in the northwest, up Seattle way. So you've got, you've got a few distilleries up that way making single malts, but outside of that, I mean, there's no real single malt being made in, not of scale anyway, in Kentucky or Tennessee or elsewhere. I mean, a little bit on the East Coast as well, a couple of New York distilleries getting into it. When I say a couple, it's probably in the dozens of distilleries. There's a lot of distilleries in America, most of which I've never heard of, and most of which you'll never see in Australia at all. Just the explosion in distilleries across the states is quite something. But I've gone off tangent a little bit here. That's right. Now, this is a really good comment from Jesse Finnegan. Jesse Finnegan. My brain today. I'm so sorry. James Finnegan. Sorry. James says they all still have to pass a tasting panel, so no matter where they are made. So it's a win-win for us. James, couldn't have said it better myself. It doesn't matter where they're made. I actually don't focus too strongly on regionality when I'm talking about whiskey at tastings, in virtuals or real tastings. I don't focus on it because focusing on those kind of stats doesn't tell me anything about the flavor of that whiskey. So if you tell me it's a peated whiskey from Islay, or you tell me it's a peated whiskey from England, does that immediately tell you the difference in taste? It doesn't at all. Maybe you could assume that the English whiskey might be a bit sort of cleaner, drier peat than the Islay whiskey, which is often a bit more damp and boggy. So I'm not sure. Country Shed of England. What a cask. Seriously, what a cask. And the proof on it was something eye-wateringly high as well. Not that that's an indicator, again, of great whiskey, but it was. It was one of those things where it was like 67% or something. And I think it was an 8-year-old in the peated category or heavily peated category. That was a ripper of a whiskey. Absolute ripper. So, yeah. Where was I? I'm just going to bring up Jesse's comment again. Sorry, but just one last thing about that. So what do you see could be a whiskey world-changing invention? That's a really, really good question. One that I don't have an immediate live stream answer for, to be honest. It would be one that I have to research and do a bit of sort of thinking on. But off the top of my head, I'd say that one of them, a whiskey world-changing, it would have to be just the availability. I mean, there's always discussions around sort of the availability and supply and quality of oak. I mean, if there's a way to sort of engineer it and future-proof it a bit better, that might work. I think a lot of it's going to come down to sort of the science of well, look, I mean, look what's already happened in the last sort of 10, 20 years, Jesse, in terms of younger whiskies have become better whiskey. So distillers are becoming better and better at knowing the cut points and the type of cask treatment to make a younger whiskey perform better at a younger age. So there used to be an era where, and this was the early era of single malt whiskey in many ways, I'd say sort of the 80s and 90s in many ways, earlier era, I should say, where you couldn't really get away with not releasing anything under a 12-year-old whiskey. And even then it was like, well, but the 18's better and the 21's better and the 25 and now, yes, old whiskey is delightful stuff. Don't get me wrong. And I love old whiskey, but I'm saying that distillers and the production team at distilleries have become better at using wood and spirit in a way where it works. It's a stronger proposition, and they have a stronger use of wood. So that's why we see things like HTMC treatment, we see STR treatment, we see recharred hogsheads. We see things like that quite often now, which is where the cask has been rejuvenated. It's provided a lot more character, but hasn't sacrificed much on age. But we have seen some even 5, 8, 9-year-old whiskies through in the last 12 to 24 months, where that whiskey would have really started to sing in the old times at, say, 10, 11, 12 years of age, but it started to perform really well in that 7 to 9 bracket. And that's a lot to do with cask treatment, cut point, and just the industry adapting to the demands and also to supply. But it doesn't pass unless it passes panel, and that's what we rely most on. Comment from Ryan Marshman. Ryan says the biggest game changer for whiskey would be if people start drinking sherry en masse again. I'm going to agree, but also disagree, because all sherry casks now used, pretty much all sherry casks used in whiskey production now it's manufactured sherry. They're casks that have been designed for whiskey production into sherry barrels, not particularly ex-sherry casks, as they would have been a long time ago. If we're talking about the era of sort of 1960s Macallans that were Paxarette, were old sherry bodega casks. Macallan and Glengoyne and a few other distilleries benefited greatly from that era. Actually, quite a few. But I'm saying they're all it's manufactured sherry now anyway, which then gets tipped into vinegar or gets turned into cooking sherry. Yes, I mean, I think people could drink more sherry. I'm not going to disagree with that part of it, though. P.S. Isn't the game changer that age is no longer the be-all and end-all? That is a very good game changer as well, Darren. As we've seen with some of the younger whiskies, and even if we remember the no-age statements that we had to put on the 139s, it's like, that's really cool. Anyway, then you have, this is a great point, Jesse. You have whiskies like Wee Beastie that was certainly a surprise gem. Never underestimate the young'uns. Never underestimate young whiskey. There can be a lot of character and a lot can speak from a young whiskey. And it also takes, we've been releasing, young whiskey. We've released a 3-year-old Scotch whiskey a couple of years ago, and we've released 2-year-old bourbons before. So we are not immune to putting young age statements on bottles. You know that. However, I think it takes a lot of gumption from a core range distillery to stand up and say, you know what, we're going to print a 5-year-old age statement on this whiskey. Let's be honest. If this was 10 years earlier, or even I'm going to go so far as to say if this was 5 years ago, Wee Beastie would have been a no-age statement release. It absolutely would have been. It would have been would have been called the Wee Beastie, and it would have been priced around the 10-year-old or just under to alleviate pressure on the 10, perhaps. But it's like, it's not, and it's labeled with an age statement. And for a core range distillery to sort of follow in the footsteps a little bit of what a few independent bottlers have been doing for a while now is quite exciting, I think. Anyway, the Bottled in Bond Act with bourbon, that was the first piece of consumer legislation. You could be right there. I don't know that much about bourbon to go, you could be right, exactly right on that. You probably could be. Bring back PAX. No, I think we'll leave that one, let one go, Rob. The Thea 1 aging reactor was a pretty wild and controversial invention. I think it was by Lost Spirits who did the abomination. Yes. Marvelous Miranda says the Thea 1 aging reactor, which was an aging reactor that there's quite a few distilleries out there around the world. I could name at least half a dozen straight off the top of my head that have done things where they're hyper aging their whiskey. I'm a bit of a traditionalist, however, on that side of things. I'm all for the innovation of, barley strains, yeast strains, water, cask treatments, cut points, still size, everything like that that is all those small changes that can change the end result, I think are fantastic. And many distilleries have been innovating and working on that, whether they I just saw this mash filter at a distillery the other day. Things that are changing the production aspect to make the spirit as they want it, and they can then play with it. I don't think you can cheat age. And I've tasted all those abominations, the lost spirit abomination things. I've tasted one Australian distillery that's doing accelerated aging. And there's another Australian distillery doing accelerated aging that I saw the other day, which was a bit worrisome, if I'm being completely honest. It is Monday. I can rant a little bit. I'm not going to say the name. I'm not here to bash it. But I have not tried it yet. So, but yes, I just don't think you can cheat the age in a cask completely. I think you can find ways to push things along a bit better. You can't find ways to skip the age entirely. So next time you see a press release that says, we aged this whiskey for 6 weeks, we aged this spirit for 6 weeks, and then it tastes like a 12-year-old Scotch, be very wary. Put it to the blind test, and I would see how you go. What's a sherry you would recommend for whiskey drinkers? Great question. I would actually recommend things like, I'd have a look at things like, I'd look at Fino and Manzanilla. I'd look at Fino sherries and Manzanilla sherries and Palo Cortado and a few others like that. So Palo Cortado can be a little bit trickier to find, and there are some really good ones out there, however. But I mean, you might like an Oloroso. I do as well, but I don't find many whiskey drinkers who actually like drinking PX, who like drinking Pedro Jimenez. I find it is overly sweet. It's great for cooking. It's great for baking and stuff like that, but it's not great for whiskey drinkers. I find generally don't like it. So if you're going to stick to a few, try an Oloroso, try a Fino. There are some lovely Finos out there and about. But just like good whiskey, you need to go to a good independent retailer to find these sherries and find an importer who brings them in, rather than you won't find much of a selection at your big supermarket retailers, I'm afraid. Acorn did a 3-year-old Kalila I spotted on the Whiskey and Air shop. Super curious what they'd be like. I tasted a 5-year-old Bunnahabhain from an independent bottler recently, Caleb, that was, let's put it this way, it was hard work. It was interesting, but nothing you'd ever reach for again. And for the sheer fact that it was nearly 70% ABV because of how its youthfulness and its fill strength and everything like that. So, yeah, I have seen some young Kalilas before. I've seen some 3, 4, 5-year-old Kalilas before. And they're often like quite brisk, very, very spirit driven. Every distillery has its own sweet spot. Every region almost has a bit of a sweet spot when it comes to age. So, I mean, I reckon Isla whiskey does need a bit more age than that generally, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years in wood. Again, I'm talking very, very generally here. Whereas, some other regions and some of the areas can react much better at younger ages. You can't accelerate maturation, not well anyway. That's mostly true. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, you can't cheat Dr. Time. Ryan says, Emilio Lustau, PX, and Oloroso. Yes. Great, exactly. PX is good. Oloroso, I would say, is much more of a whiskey drinker's sherry, though, still. There we go. So where are we? Where are we up to? I've lost my train of thought. But that's kind of fun, though. That's the whole idea of the Monday chat. And I brought up the original letter that was sent out to members back in 2002, but we'll come back to that. So redefining what an independent bottler is. This is another way that the society has been a game changer. I'm going to bring up slightly bigger here, and here we go. So I've talked a little bit about this again before in the past about what we're doing differently and why it's important, the difference that the society does versus your usual independent bottler. So here we have Ewan Campbell on the left and Kai Evelo on the right. They're both run the whiskey team, if you like, in the UK. They're sitting at the vaults, enjoying a dram. And these guys, even just to be able to sit down and enjoy the bottled version of something that they've had such a hand in straight from the beginning of filling these casks, of direct sourcing the spirit from distilleries, not relying on third-party stocks, but actually having a say in the maturation, the evaluation, the sensory analysis, the SWIRI research, the flavor panel research. There's so much going on behind the scenes at the society to make sure that the panel is improving, as well as what we're selecting is improving through analysis, through research. And I've talked about this before in different live streams, but I think it's a really worthwhile point just to touch on, because it's, there's like I say, a lot going on there that is worth looking at, really. And there's there's just one of the photos of one of our warehouses of some of the casks coming in, palletized there behind, and some of the casks being rolled out at the same time just in front here. And I can see a cask that at least at one point had a Kalila 1993 head on it, which that looks kind of cool. That's a sherry butt right there. Good fun, good fun. So yeah, like I say, and that also involves redefining what a whiskey club is meant to be, which I want to talk on a little bit more detail on another stream, but it was sort of a related point. The definition of a whiskey club is far more than just a, bottle of the moment or bottle of the month or whatever it is. It's more about the community. It's about these streams. It's about our events. It's about Unfiltered. It's about the membership. It's about the global experience that being a society member entails. And that's really important to us as well. One of the other things, of course, that we've been a game changer in the last 20 years in Australia has been, and indeed around the world, of course, but I can only really speak to our Australian experience here, is flavor pairings and one-off experiences, which I can't spell, obviously. But we've done a lot over the years in terms of flavor pairings, in terms of events, in terms of tastings and things where we've got members together to actually see what we're coming up with, what we're creating, and really working towards that. And I think it's been one of the most rewarding parts of my role in many ways, has been doing these really special events where we're actually working directly with chefs, with flavor creators, people like Krisner, who did with Chocolate Night with late last year, where we've had these experiences, whether they be, whether they be dinners, lunches, ice cream, beer, hot chips, as Wooler and I did last year. There's been a lot over the last, I'd say, especially over the last 18 to 24 months, people like Franz Schurer, who we've collaborated with, and finding these flavor pairings and incredible, as Franz has said before, 1 + 1 = 3 moments, where society casks, single casks with unique flavor profiles paired with dishes that have just blown minds. And that for me has been really sort of the most important part of the journey in many ways, because it's the whole sort of aspect of enjoying where flavor can take you, just on a visceral level. I can't explain it any better than that, really. It's quite something. And having those sort of flavors and even playing around with things that shouldn't work, like when you do, when you do sliders and whiskey, it's like, let's find 5 sliders and 5 casks that work with them. Things like that. That's incredible. And that's a lot of fun. And as I've said before, we have done and are doing a lot of things like whiskey dinners, as there's one we just did last year. Oh no, late 2019. Getting ahead of myself. And finding whiskey pairings and tastings that really match up, and working quite closely with a range of chefs and flavor creators and all sorts of things like that, which has been a real blast. Of course, one of the other reasons why the society has been an absolute game changer, of course, is single malts before they were single malts. That sounds like a bit of a silly phrase. Again, my spelling was out on the last one, and now my phrasing's out on this one. What a day. Yeah. Some great comments coming in. I'm going to grab all those. But single malts before they were single malts. There's a distillery. There's another distillery. I couldn't tell you the name of each. They might be in the photo, but we don't talk about those names. We're talking about the codes, of course. That's code 30, and that's code, mental blank, 26. Okay. So, but these are examples of just 2 out of quite a few distilleries in our lists where society was bottling these as single malt whiskies. I mean, they're also single cask, but it's single malt whiskies before they were single malts. And I've talked about this before, but I think it's really exciting. That for me is one of the most exciting things ever. So just imagine this for a second. When we first bottled 26.1 or 30.1, they were bottled by the society as hand-selected single cask single malts before the distillery itself had ever released a single malt as a core range bottling. So we sort of beat them to the post in a way and picked the eyes out of their best stock. A little bit of that still happens today, obviously, but a lot of it is now the innovation of working on the stock that we want, and we are building our inventory and our warehousing and everything like that, which builds up the community and the amount of bottlings available for members, which continues to grow. That's exciting as well. Comment here from Alex, who said, Alex, by the way, is a relatively recent member, and thank you, Alex, so much for coming to the events in Tassie. Great to see you there. And of course, welcome aboard. Welcome to the society. Listen to a podcast recently about clubs, mentioned SMWS and other big known clubs in the same way. I objected to that. You're choosing what you want here, not just one or perhaps two each month. That's right. We are choosing what we want here, and I appreciate that, Alex. And that's all through the work of our cellar master, Andrew, who's picking things out for our members. And he's working with the UK on bringing in the casks that we want for our members. And of course, then the UK are working with our casking team and our tasting panel on what's getting bottled and what's being selected. Pardon me. Okay, need a bit of water here. So, yeah, but it's true. It's far more than just bottle of the moment kind of thing, or opt in, opt out kind of thing. There's no obligation, obviously, with the society of any bottlings, but you'd be foolish to miss out on some of them especially year on year. So where are we? Let's keep going here. And of course, some of the original game changing that we did and continue to do in the Australian branch. I just loved this comment here. Oh, Miranda says, and rightly so, that Alex is a legend. Marvelous, Miranda, you're not wrong. I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see it. And I'll just drop Miranda's comment there. Here we go. Look at this cool little thing. I love this. You're invited to the launch of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Australia and some of the original Bob Dewar comics and drawings here, I should say. And complimentary tastings of exclusive single malt whiskies will take place at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday the 7th and Tuesday the 12th and Wednesday 13th of November at the Royal Automobile Club of Australia. So I think it's very cool. You can see the very opening of the branch, late 2002. That's not our phone number anymore, and I don't think that email works anymore either. But it's got the old logo, and it's just a nice relic of history. Now, before I go on, before we leave it for the evening, I should say we've actually got three live streams this week. This is the first one. This is just a look at some of the game changes that the society has been through, some of the moments in the society's history that have been game changers. Some of the times that society has truly changed the landscape of whiskey, not just and experiences and flavor, not just around the world, but of course also in Australia. And sorry, not just in the UK, but also in Australia. And we will continue to do so this year. We've got a big year ahead of us. We've released 2 casks last week. That's just the tip of the iceberg, honestly. Feb Outturn is in production at the moment. We're working very hard on that. And but really what I wanted to touch on of tonight was also the other 2 live streams coming up, which are 2 fantastic people, 2 of my favorite people working in the whiskey industry. And that is, of course, we have Tuesday live with Luke McCarthy, as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, author, writer, blogger, reviewer, and local spirits hero. And then, of course, we have Thursday live with Heather Tillett, who is the head distiller for Sullivan's Cove. She's fantastic. What a lovely person, and also super knowledgeable about the Tasmanian scene, about Sullivan's Cove Distillery, of course, and about distillation. And that's going to be a really good chat as well. That's a pretty big, in-depth one as well. Alex, those snacks you brought to the Taz event, I think they were unbelievable. I think that's right. I think I'm getting that right. They were fantastic. So thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this journey, being a part of the game changes this year as we're looking forward to. We have some of the most amazing stuff coming up this year. As I mentioned at our earlier live stream from last week, it's a champs year. It's a gathering year. It's a whiskey festivals year. And there's some products coming through that are not whiskey, but you can still drink them. So that's exciting. Oh, it's not even spirit, I should say. It's not even spirit. There you go. That's the biggest clue you're ever going to get. But we're really excited by this year ahead. And we've got some very special previews coming up. And we've got an awesome February outturn in the works at the moment. But really keep an eye on the 2 of the greatest whiskey minds around. As Miranda says there on the screen, she's not wrong. These are 2 of the greatest whiskey minds around. I won't even just say just in Australia. I would say in the world. These 2 people are fantastic. Tune in tomorrow at 7:30 with Luke McCarthy and 7 p.m. on Thursday with Heather. Really looking forward to it. In the meantime, look after yourselves, drink well, be happy, and I will see you all tomorrow night live with Luke McCarthy. Thank you so much.